And welcome to this video tutorial on device-based authentication. Now, throughout our lives, we've been signing into services using username and password credentials, which is great if you have a keyboard, although passwords can be hard to remember. But if you're interacting with an app on your television using the remote control, it's pretty hard to type a password. If you've ever tried to use an on-screen keyboard, it's really quite a pain. Now, one thing that makes the Senza platform really special is that every device has a unique code built into it that can be used to authenticate whoever has that device on your platform. So your viewers basically don't need to remember username and password credentials. As long as they have their Senza Cloud Connector, it will just work. So we're going to go through the authentication flow to show you how that works. And the app we're going to use has a pretty simple user interface in this case, but there's some interesting things happening behind the scenes. So we're going to go and dive in. You might want to follow along in our developer documentation in the tutorials section under device authentication and QR code authentication so that you can see what's going on and get a little bit more detail. But we're going to do a live demo here and walk you through the code. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to use the Senza client library to get what's called a client assertion from the server. That's basically an encrypted JSON web token that includes some information about the device, basically an encoded representation of the device ID. And we're going to need to make an API request to a server that implements some authentication functions. It basically takes that client assertion and returns what's called an access token. That's something that you can include in every subsequent request to the server that authenticates the user for a specific limited period of time. Then we're going to use that auth token to make another request that just gets the user's basic info, like their name and their favorite color for this demo. And we'll show you how to do that. So we've got our server running right here, and we're going to walk through the flow right now. The interesting thing is that most of what's going to happen is all behind the scenes. So when I click on connect, it's going to make a request to the server, and you'll see some stuff happen here in the console. And then everything I said has already happened at this point. You can see that the decoded JSON web token has my device ID. That's that right there. We could just pass the device ID itself, but this is encrypted, signed, and all that good stuff. So then we are going to set an access token for that device to just a random string of letters and numbers that we've made up. We're going to set that in memory. And then when I make a request to get the user info, it's going to look up that access token and find my device ID, just the same thing in the opposite direction. And then it's going to look up my user info by the device ID. So let's start by having a look at the source code. We're going to look at the config first. This is a very, very lightweight user database. Essentially, we have a list of users with their name and color. Ignore this password hash for a moment. And then we've got a separate list of the devices. So this is basically an in-memory database that we're going to use to do that lookup that maps a device ID to a user name. Now you'll notice that actually in this case I've got more than one device ID maps to the same username. That's a configuration that we would allow. So once I look up that device ID, it maps to this username, and then that username has a printed name and a favorite color right there. So let's have a look at some of the code to see what's going on. So first thing we've got here is a Node.js server file, and it's got a post endpoint called /auth/token. This is a pretty industry standard way of requesting an access token. So we're leveraging some common code paradigms here so that we're not reinventing the wheel. Now, inside the public folder, you'll notice this web page right here. So the page you saw is extremely simple. It's just got a single text string on it. We'll get to this QR code business in the second half of the tutorial. And then in the code, when the app starts up, what we're going to do is we are going to get the client assertion. We're going to call get client assertion from the auth object in the client library. And we're going to print that to the screen. And then we are going to use that client assertion to get an access token. So when I call get access token, it's going to make a request to /auth/token. And then it's going to get it back. So let's jump back to the server side and we'll see how that's implemented. Over here in the server, we get the client assertion, and then we validate the client assertion and get the payload from it. And then we are going to call generate access token to make a new access token from the payload. We have a function that gets the device ID from the payload that is simply just parsing out this string from this whole object right there. And when we create a new access token, that is literally a random string of letters and numbers. Hard to guess, hard to remember. And then this is the key point. Here we are going to modify our in-memory database of access tokens so that we map that access token to a device ID. And then we are going to return it to the requester. So you see here, we just return it. And this is a very standard format where we have the access token, the token type, and the amount of time it expires in. This really should be some kind of number of seconds. Then in the client code, now that we've got that access token, we're going to print it out. And then we are going to call hello. Now, what does hello do? Hello just makes a request to an endpoint called /hello. And this is the key point. All communication with the server now should have a header whose key is authorization, and the value is the word bearer, and then a space, and then that access token. That's a really common paradigm that you'll see everywhere on the web. And then when we get the response there, we'll update the user info. Let's go ahead and have a look at the code for implementing that. So over here in the hello function, we're going to validate the access token from the request. And what that does is it basically just looks up the access token in that index that we created previously. And if everything looks good, note that I'm not going over all the error checking, but it is important, so pay attention to every place where it might throw an error if something didn't work properly. Then we're going to print out that we found the access token and then return the device ID. So you'll notice that you saw that in the console output right there. Once we've validated the access token, we are going to get the user info. We're doing a little work here to remove the password so we don't return that in the response. And then we return the user info right there. And we can go ahead and have a look at the remote debugger to see what that looked like when we made those requests. So in this case, if I look at the console output, I'm going to see that client assertion here. That's the result of calling the getClientAssertion function. You can see the access token that we received and the response from calling the hello endpoint, which is this little object that has the user's name and favorite color. Notice their password is not here. And then it goes and renders that screen. So again, if we look at the client code again, once we get that back, we are going to update the user interface and show a message saying hello and the username, and we're going to change the background color to their favorite color. So that's pretty much a summary of how the device-based authentication works. It's actually simpler than it sounds at first. Now, this does rely on one key assumption, which is that when you are giving a device to an end user, you're going to be maintaining a database where you update this index right here so that you always know who has what device. Now, what happens if you don't have a workflow for creating an index like that and you want to distribute devices to your users in a different way? Now, we're going to come up with a hybrid approach where the first time someone tries to connect, if we don't have a record of whose device that is, we're going to show them a QR code, and then in that case, we're going to let them launch something on their mobile. In this case, we're going to make a little web page. But if you already have a mobile app, whether it's web-based or a native app, you could implement this functionality where the user is already logged in, and therefore they wouldn't even need to think about logging in one more time. Once you have authenticated them, we can actually modify this index by creating a record for them, and that way they'll have to go through this process once, but then they will never have to think about it again because we will have registered the device for them on the fly. So let's go ahead and see how that flow is going to work. Now I'm going to use the simulator for a different device. And when I click connect right now, you're going to see that because this device is not in my list, I'm going to see a QR code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and zap that QR code on my phone. And so that you can follow along, I'm going to copy that URL and paste it here so that you can see what I see on my phone. So now I'm just going to go ahead and use my client credentials to sign in. And when I click on connect, it's going to say connected. And look, as you can see, I am now connected. And the in-memory version of that index from device ID to user has now been updated with Elisa's record. Now, in this example, that's all stored in memory, so when I quit the server, it's going to go away, but you should probably save that properly in a database. So let's go see how that's been implemented. So on the index page, we're going to see if the user does not have an account. We're going to show that sorry, this is the wrong page. One moment. So you notice we have that little image for the QR code. So in the case that the user does not have a record, we are going to call show QR code, and that's just going to make a link to open the login.html file on the user's phone. And we're going to make a URL we're going to make a URL that can open it, and then we're going to use this link to make a QR code for it, and then we're going to display the QR code. So when the user opens up that page, they're going to see a real simple classic page with username and password. And when they click on that connect link, we're going to call this function here called authorize. And when they do that, we're going to make a post request to create a authorization resource, essentially passing in a username and a hash of the password. Note that we're not storing or transmitting passwords in clear text. We're going to take that string and turn it into a number. That way it's more secure. So you'll notice that in our config, you remember these passwords here. Again, this isn't the password, this is a hash of the password. So when we get a request to the authorize function, we are going to we're going to validate that it's the right access token. So that access token asserts that this is a page that's associated with that device ID. So you'll notice that the access token is actually in the URL of this app, but the device ID is not. So that is more secure. We're going to validate that that username corresponds to a record and that the password is correct and exists. And then now we are going to modify the device table to associate that username with that device. And then we are going to, sorry about that, print out that we've authorized that user like we do right here. And then we are almost done, but did you notice that the app on the TV updated instantly once I had logged in? We're going to want to send a message from the server to the web page that's being shown on the TV just to tell it that the device has now been authorized and it should go ahead and try again. So get rid of that QR code and go ahead and sign in. So we're going to use the device messaging API, and we are going to, in order to call the device messaging API, we need to get an access token from the Senza platform. So you can check the documentation on how to call the device messaging API in the dev docs, but basically we've got a config file right here that has the config for Senza. So just like we are providing access tokens to our client app, we're going to get an access token from Senza so we can call the Senza API. So once we get that access token, which we would refresh periodically if we need to, we are going to go ahead and send a device message to the app running on that device, and we are basically just going to tell it that the device has been authorized. So when we load the app on the device, you'll notice that when the app starts up, we add a listener for any messages, and then we're just going to call that hello function again if we receive any message. We don't care what the message body is. As long as we get a message, we're just going to call hello again. So that's about all we need to do. One more thing is the opposite of hello is goodbye, and we've got a little hook so that if we hit the back button or the escape key, it's going to clear the authorization. So you'll see if I hit escape, it's going to go back to showing the QR code again. And then I can effectively use the same page again to connect again, just to do the full loop from start to finish over again. So that's about it. You've seen in this tutorial how you can at the same time provide a completely friction-free experience for those users whose devices you've registered to them before they received the device, and a best of both worlds approach so that you can provide an experience that is almost as good using a QR code, so they need to think about it for a few seconds, but then after that, never again. So that's it. Thanks for watching.